Ancient mariners read the ocean's pulse to know exactly when to set sail. They left behind cryptic stone carvings and layered beaches that hold their forgotten schedules. By the end of this, you will know how to read these coastal clocks yourself, uncovering the lost science of sailing by the moon. How did civilizations without writing keep perfect time across thousands of miles of coastline? What crucial maritime secrets are hidden in plain sight along our shores? What do you believe is the most enduring mark a civilization can leave behind? That gravitational dance between Earth, Moon, and Sun creates more than just rising and falling water. It generates a precise, predictable rhythm. The Moon's pull is strongest, creating a bulge of water on the side of Earth facing it, but a second, matching bulge appears on the exact opposite side, a result of the centrifugal force from our planet's rotation. As Earth spins daily, most coastlines experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides. This is the basic pulse of the ocean, a heartbeat ancient mariners knew intimately. Then, layered over this daily rhythm, comes the monthly cycle dictated by the Sun and Moon's alignment. When the Sun, Moon, and Earth line up during the full and new moons, their gravitational forces combine, pulling in the same direction. This creates the highest high tides and the lowest low tides, known as spring tides. These powerful tidal surges expose more land, create stronger currents, and were likely windows for launching heavy, deep-drafted vessels. Conversely, when the Sun and Moon pull at right angles during the Moon's quarter phases, their forces partially cancel each other out. This creates the muted neap tides, with the smallest difference between high and low water. These comma periods might have been preferred for fishing close to shore or for navigating tricky, shallow estuaries. This entire system is not perfectly simple, however. The Moon follows an elliptical orbit around Earth, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. This slight variation changes the strength of its pull, adding another layer of predictability. Even more significant is a grand 18.6-year cycle in the Moon's orbit, where the angle of its path relative to Earth's equator slowly shifts. Over this long period, the range of the tides at a given location waxes and wanes. A civilization observing the tides for generations would have undoubtedly noticed this long-term rhythm, this great, slow breath of the sea. They would have seen that not every spring tide is equal, and that every few years the highest tides of the year would reach a little farther up the beach. This profound predictability is the very reason tides could function as a clock. The forces that drove the tides 4,000 years ago are identical to the forces at work today. The mathematics are constant. This means that if we find a physical mark on a coastline, a notch carved into bedrock at a specific height, we can plug that data into our understanding of these celestial cycles. We can run the cosmic clock backwards and calculate exactly which tidal phase, which day, which year that mark corresponded to. The stone itself is silent, but the physics of the universe gives it a voice. These intricate sailing calendars form the very backbone of maritime societies. Think of them not as simple dates on a stone, but as the operating system for an entire civilization connected to the sea. Their survival, trade, and expansion depended on this complex, interwoven knowledge. A coastal trader carrying pottery, for instance, needed to know the spring tides that would allow their heavily laden vessel to cross a shallow river bar. An open ocean explorer setting out for new lands would wait for the predictable winds that arrived with a specific seasonal tide. A local fishing community planned their expeditions around the neap tides, when calmer waters made their smaller boats safer close to rocky shores. This was a science of perfect timing. The most advanced calendars did not rely on a single rhythm. They layered the daily pulse of two high tides over the monthly swing from spring to neap, and then overlaid that with the annual cycle of seasons and storms. This created a multi-dimensional timetable, a master schedule for the sea. This maritime timekeeping was so vital that it became synchronized with the rhythm of life on land. The same society that planted crops by the phases of the moon would also launch its most important trading fleet by the highest tides of the year, often coinciding with a major religious festival. The calendar was a single, unified heartbeat for the entire culture. This knowledge was not kept in a book. It was a living tradition passed from elder to apprentice, refined with every voyage. Each mariner added their own hard-won observations, a collective intelligence built over centuries. When this knowledge vanished, it was not merely a schedule that was lost. Entire economic networks collapsed, routes to distant lands were forgotten, and the very identity of a seafaring people faded. This profound loss is what makes the search for physical evidence so urgent. Why would a community go to the immense effort of carving notches into solid rock or observing the slow accumulation of beach ridges? They were creating a permanent library, a fail-safe against the fragility of human memory. By reconstructing these calendars, we are not just recovering tides and dates. We are rediscovering how an ancient people saw their world, how they organized time itself, and what they valued most deeply. Their priorities are etched into the landscape, waiting for us to learn how to read them again. These silent marks in the stone are the first physical keys to unlocking the past. Scattered along coastlines around the world, you can find strange, deliberate indentations carved directly into bedrock, always at very specific elevations. These are not random erosional features or the result of casual human activity. They are precision instruments, permanent tidal gauges set in stone by ancient mariners. The placement of each notch was a critical decision, corresponding to a specific tidal condition that held immense practical significance. One notch might mark the exact water level needed to safely float a laden trading vessel off a beach at high tide. Another, carved slightly lower, could indicate the point where a dangerous rocky channel became passable, or where the treacherous outgoing current began to strengthen. They are a physical code, with each cut representing a vital piece of maritime knowledge. What makes these rock-cut notches so invaluable to researchers is their stubborn permanence. While wooden posts rot and painted lines fade, these stone inscriptions endure for centuries, even millennia. They provide a fixed reference point that remains constant even as shorelines shift and human settlements come and go. Modern archaeologists approach these features with the precision of crime scene investigators. Using sophisticated laser scanners and surveying equipment, they map each notch with millimeter accuracy, creating detailed elevation profiles of the rock face. This data is what reveals the ancient code. The distribution patterns are telling. Often, the notches cluster at certain key elevations, creating a clear histogram of the most important water levels for that specific harbor or launch point. Some notches even show signs of being maintained or recut over generations, polished smooth by countless hands checking the water level against the mark. This tells us they were not just temporary markers, but vital community infrastructure passed down from parent to child as essential navigational aids. When you find a series of notches at different heights on a single headland, you are looking at more than just isolated markers. You are seeing a comprehensive tidal monitoring system, a complete dashboard of the sea's rhythm, carved in stone for anyone who knew how to read it. These inscriptions give us direct physical proof of how ancient sailors quantified the ocean's pulse, turning an abstract force into a measurable, manageable tool. Yet for all their resilience, these rock carvings tell only part of the story. A second, even more subtle record of these ancient calendars is written not in stone, but in sand and sediment, patiently accumulated over thousands of years. While the rock-cut notches give us precise snapshots, beach ridges offer us the entire film reel of coastal history. These long, low mounds of sand and gravel running parallel to the shore are nature's own meticulous record keepers. Each ridge is a former shoreline, a line in the sand left behind by the waves at a specific tidal level. Over decades and centuries, as sea levels gently fluctuated or the shoreline slowly built itself seaward, a new ridge would form, preserving the previous high tide line like a growth ring in a tree. This creates a sequential archive, with the oldest ridges farthest inland and the newest ones closest to the water, a chronological library written in sediment. What makes these formations so revealing is their composition. A core sample extracted from a 1,000-year-old beach ridge is like a time capsule. Scientists analyze the sediment grain size, the presence of shell fragments, and even microscopic organisms called foraminifera. A ridge built of coarse sand and pebbles might indicate a period of powerful storm surges, while a ridge of fine sand suggests centuries of calm, consistent tides. These details tell us not just where the water was, but what the ocean was like when it deposited that material. A layer of storm-deposited cobbles within a sequence of fine sand records a catastrophic event, a king tide or a hurricane that would have reshaped the coastline and disrupted maritime life for years. The spacing between these ridges is equally eloquent. Widely spaced ridges suggest a rapidly advancing coastline or a quickly falling sea level, conditions that would have constantly opened new landing sites and closed old ones. Tightly packed ridges indicate a long period of stability, a golden age for sailors who could rely on the same channels and harbors for generations. This rhythm of change and stability directly dictated the sailing calendars of the people living there. A community might have used a particular beach for launching boats for 200 years, only to abandon it when the ridges showed the harbor was silting up, making it inaccessible even at the highest tides. In some remarkable cases, we find clear evidence that ancient people did not just read this natural calendar, they edited it. They would artificially enhance a beach ridge, building it up with rocks and soil to create a more permanent barrier against storm surges, or they might excavate a channel through a ridge to maintain access to a lagoon as the shoreline changed. These modifications are a powerful testament to a deep, collaborative understanding of coastal processes. It was a partnership with the ocean, a continuous effort to manage the tidal clock for their own survival. By combining the pinpoint accuracy of the rock-cut notches with the long-term, environmental story told by the beach ridges, researchers can begin to run the cosmic clock backwards with astonishing precision, correlating these earthly marks with the unchangeable rhythms of the moon. A single carved notch or a solitary beach ridge tells only a fragment of the story. The true picture emerges when multiple scientific voices join the conversation, each interpreting the clues in their own language. Reconstructing a vanished sailing calendar is not a task for one expert, but for an entire team of scientific detectives. Archaeologists arrive first, carefully excavating the settlements and hearths near these tidal markers. They find fishhooks, pottery from distant lands, and the remains of boats, establishing who these people were and precisely when they lived. This human context transforms an anonymous rock carving into a deliberate act by a known community. While archaeologists focus on the people, geomorphologists study the stage itself. They map how rivers deposited sediment, how storms reshaped headlands, and how the very shape of the coastline has transformed over centuries. Their work reveals whether a harbor was deep and sheltered or if it silted up, forcing sailors to find a new launch point. their analysis explains why a particular tidal notch was so crucial for survival. Then come the oceanographers with their powerful computers running the cosmic clock in reverse. They create digital models of the ancient sea, inputting the precise coastal geography provided by the geomorphologists. Their simulations calculate the exact height of the tides on any given day, 1,000 years ago, revealing which lunar phase would have made that carved notch perfectly align with the waterline. To anchor all this in time, geochronologists provide the calendar, using techniques like radiocarbon dating on ancient seashells embedded in a beach ridge, or optically stimulated luminescence that measures when a sand grain last saw sunlight. They assign hard dates to these features. They can tell us that a specific sequence of ridges formed between 400 and 600 AD, giving us the exact years to plug into the oceanographer's tidal model. Meanwhile, historians and ethnographers scour old texts and listen to oral traditions, sometimes finding surviving fragments of this lost knowledge. An old folk song about fishing during the little moon might perfectly describe the neap tides, while a myth about a sea god's anger could be a metaphorical warning about seasonal storm surges. Finally, statisticians weave all these threads together. They look for patterns across dozens of sites, using mathematical models to distinguish coincidence from a widespread, systematic practice of tidal observation. This interdisciplinary chorus creates a powerful system of checks and balances. When the oceanographer's model shows a spring tide on a certain date, and the geochronologist's dating of a nearby shell confirms people were there at that exact time, the evidence becomes undeniable. This collaborative methodology does more than just recover facts, it resurrects a worldview. It shows us how ancient mariners saw their universe as an interconnected system, where the moon's path directly dictated the success of a voyage, and the rhythm of the sea was woven into the fabric of their culture. Their sophisticated understanding, lost for centuries, is now being heard again through the combined voices of modern science. The Mediterranean Sea presents a fascinating puzzle. Its tides are subtle, a gentle rise and fall compared to the dramatic surges of the open ocean. You would think such modest waters would not need complex tidal calendars. Yet the opposite is true. In this enclosed sea, where a few inches of water could mean the difference between a laden ship floating freely or grinding against the harbor bottom, ancient mariners developed some of the most precise tidal systems ever discovered. The Phoenicians, master traders of the ancient world, left their signature in the stone of Levantine ports. Archaeologists have found series of carefully carved notches positioned at exact elevations. These were not random marks. Each notch corresponded to a specific tidal condition perfect for a certain type of ship. A higher notch might guide the loading of a heavy, deep-drafted vessel carrying copper ingots, while a lower one signaled the ideal time for a smaller, faster galley laden with fragile pottery to depart. These carvings were the harbor master's daily schedule, etched permanently into the waterfront, allowing for the seamless coordination of a bustling commercial port. Farther west, at the Greek colony of Massalia, modern Marseille, the story is written in the earth. The settlers there faced a unique challenge: the confluence of Mediterranean tides and the powerful freshwater flow of the Rhone River. Their solution was a masterpiece of environmental engineering. They did not just observe the natural beach ridges, they sculpted them. By reinforcing certain ridges and carving channels through others, they created an artificial tidal gauge, a hybrid system that measured both the saltwater's pulse and the river's seasonal moods. This allowed them to predict exactly when the river's current would be weakest and the tidal push strongest, creating perfect launch windows for voyages into the treacherous western Mediterranean. The Romans, with their famous engineering prowess, took this a step further. Along the Italian coast, they built tidal knowledge directly into their infrastructure. They constructed quays with inscribed stone markers that functioned like public service announcements. These stones did not just show the water level, they specified optimal sailing times, directly linking tidal phases to the lunar cycles that govern them. A sailor could walk the dock, read the inscription, and know that 3 days after the new moon, the high tide would peak at this specific mark, making it the best time to set sail for North Africa. This integration of celestial observation and practical engineering created a comprehensive sailing guide. It was a system that wove together tides, weather patterns, and star positions into a single, reliable framework for maximizing safety and profit across a crowded sea. The sophistication of these Mediterranean calendars forces us to rethink the technological landscape of the ancient world. They were not primitive guesswork, but the result of generations of meticulous observation, a refined science embedded in the very stones of their harbors. This knowledge was the invisible engine of trade, connecting Egypt to Greece and Rome to Carthage. Yet as we venture beyond this enclosed sea, we find evidence of tidal calendars that operated on a truly breathtaking scale. The Pacific Ocean demanded a different kind of genius from its navigators. Here, voyages stretched across thousands of kilometers of open water, between tiny islands that were mere specks on an immense blue canvas. The tidal variations were not the gentle Mediterranean whispers but powerful, island-swallowing surges. In this vastness, indigenous navigators developed tidal calendars of breathtaking complexity, woven into the very fabric of their oral traditions. These were not just schedules for departure, but dynamic mental maps for survival. A master navigator from Micronesia, for instance, would hold in his mind a precise understanding of how the tidal stream flowed between 2 specific islands 3 days' sail apart. He knew that catching that current at the exact right phase of the moon was like catching a moving sidewalk across the sea, a force that could carry his voyaging canoe effortlessly toward its target. This knowledge was layered with the flight paths of seabirds, the position of specific stars, and the feel of particular swells refracting around unseen islands. It was a multi-sensory navigation system where the tide was one vital instrument in a full orchestra of environmental cues. The physical proof of this deep tidal intimacy is etched into the islands themselves. On many shores, you find stone platforms known as mari or heiau, constructed at elevations that align perfectly with the highest spring tides. These were not just religious sites but functional launch ramps. A large ocean-going canoe, heavy with provisions, families, and trade goods, could only be moved into the water when the sea itself rose to meet the stone, a celestial event marked on their calendar. Elsewhere, smaller stone shrines perch at the water's edge in locations that are only accessible during extreme low tides, allowing for the collection of specific shellfish or the observance of rituals tied to the revealed seabed. The most telling features are the navigation stones, carefully positioned upright markers on headlands. From a distance, these might look like random natural formations. But when you stand behind one and sight across its top, it points directly toward a safe, deep water passage through the fringing reef, a passage that only becomes navigable when the tide has risen to a precise height. What is truly staggering is the consistency of this knowledge across the Pacific. Separate island groups speaking different languages and separated by hundreds of kilometers of open ocean maintained nearly identical understandings of the tidal patterns that connected them. This was a networked intelligence, a shared science that enabled the settlement of the last major habitable lands on Earth. Modern researchers, working in close partnership with contemporary Polynesian and Micronesian navigators who are reviving these ancient arts, have made a humbling discovery. These traditional practices often encoded mathematical principles of wave propagation and celestial mechanics that Western science would not formally describe until the 18th and 19th centuries. The Pacific systems show us that tidal calendars were not monolithic. They were exquisite adaptations, finely tuned to local geography and cultural priorities, representing one of humanity's most profound intellectual achievements on the water. Yet across the world, in the coastal wetlands of Northern Europe, another civilization was developing its own unique and remarkably precise method of reading the ocean's clock. The Atlantic coast of Europe presented a sea of formidable power, where tides did not merely rise and fall but raced across vast mudflats and surged through narrow channels. In places like Brittany and Cornwall, the difference between high and low water could span the height of a 3-story building, a daily transformation of the landscape that dictated every aspect of coastal life. Survival here demanded more than just observation. It required a deep, predictive science etched permanently into the very granite of the shore. Archaeologists walking these coastlines find the legacy of this science in a language of stone. In Brittany, they have mapped intricate series of notches carved into resistant granite headlands. Each cut is a precise record of a specific tidal condition, but not just for sailing. One set of marks might indicate the exact water level that exposed a particular reef, creating a temporary, rich fishing ground accessible for only a few hours. Another series of notches, carved at a slightly different elevation, could signal the ideal time for harvesting specific types of seaweed used for fertilizer, or the moment when seawater trapped in artificial ponds had evaporated enough to begin collecting salt. These were not general markers, they were a specialized economic calendar, each groove representing a different facet of the community's livelihood, all governed by the moon's pull. Further north, along the Cornish coast, the evidence shifts from simple carvings to landscape-scale engineering. At Bronze and Iron Age settlements, we find evidence of artificial channels carefully dug to funnel the rising tide. These were not canals for boats but giant visual aids. By concentrating the incoming seawater into a narrow passage, the engineers amplified its movement, making a specific tidal height dramatically obvious to anyone watching. A post set in the channel would show the water rising at an accelerated, unmistakable pace, providing a clear, shared signal for when to launch the fishing boats or retreat from the advancing sea. Modified beach ridges served a similar purpose, their profiles subtly altered to make the high tide line stand out like a ruler against the shore. What transforms these technical achievements into something more profound is their deep entanglement with myth and ritual. The same tidal conditions that opened a fishing ground might also be sacred to a local deity, a time when the veil between worlds was believed to be thin. A treacherous tidal race where water funneled between islands with violent force was not just a navigational hazard, it was the home of a spirit or the breath of a giant. This fusion of empirical knowledge and spiritual belief created a powerful mnemonic system. The story of the goddess who demanded respect at the turning tide was also a vital safety warning, ensuring that the dangerous, precise knowledge of the sea was passed down through generations in a memorable, compelling narrative. This sacred geography resulted in hyper-localized knowledge. The tidal calendar for a village on one side of a peninsula could be completely different from that of a community just 20 kilometers away, each system perfectly adapted to its own unique combination of reefs, currents, and resources. The physical evidence shows this knowledge was not static. Over centuries, newer notches were carved beside older ones, channels were redug, and stone markers were reset, a continuous process of refinement and recalibration. This was a living science, maintained across countless human lifetimes to master a coastline where a mistake in timing could be fatal. The sheer longevity of these systems, some maintained for over 1,000 years, speaks to their absolute necessity. They were the bedrock of survival, the clockwork that allowed entire cultures to not just live by the sea, but to thrive because of it. To unlock the true age of these coastal clocks, however, scientists must first solve the ultimate puzzle, determining exactly when the hands stopped turning. Determining the exact age of a rock-cut notch or a beach ridge is a scientific puzzle in itself. These are not artifacts with clear dates stamped on them. Their age must be teased out through clever, indirect methods. For the hard stone of carved notches, one powerful technique is microerosion analysis. When a fresh surface of crystalline rock like granite is exposed by a tool, it begins a slow, predictable battle with the elements. Wind, rain, and salt spray gradually wear down the sharp edges of mineral crystals. By carefully measuring the microscopic rounding of these crystal edges under high magnification, scientists can estimate how many centuries have passed since that surface was first cut. It is a geological clock ticking away at an almost imperceptible pace. Sometimes the notches themselves trap time capsules. As sediment and organic matter accumulate in the bottom of a carved groove, they can seal in bits of shell, charcoal, or even ancient seed. These organic materials are perfect for radiocarbon dating. By measuring the decay of a specific radioactive isotope within them, researchers can determine precisely when that plant or animal was alive, giving them a solid date for when the notch was open and actively collecting this material, meaning it was in use as a tidal gauge. For the vast, sandy archives of beach ridges, a different kind of clock is used, one that lives within the sand grains themselves. Optically stimulated luminescence dating works by measuring the tiny amount of natural radiation that builds up inside a grain of quartz or feldspar from the moment it is buried and shielded from sunlight. In a dark laboratory, scientists can stimulate these grains with light, causing them to release that stored energy as a faint glow. The intensity of that glow tells them how long it has been since that grain of sand last saw the sun, effectively dating the moment the beach ridge formed and sealed it in darkness. But science alone does not tell the whole story. The human context is equally vital. A piece of distinctive pottery, a stone tool, or the remains of a wooden post found in direct association with a tidal feature can be dated through typology, comparing it to known artifact sequences from the region. This links the feature to a specific cultural period. Even the elevation of a notch or a ridge serves as a clue. By comparing its height to well-established curves of past sea levels, researchers can place it within a certain window of time. In rare and wonderful instances, the past speaks directly. A stone marker might bear a faded inscription, or a historical text might describe the construction of a specific harbor feature. These direct cultural references provide an anchor, a fixed point in history around which all the other scientific dates can crystallize. The true power, however, lies in the convergence. When microerosion analysis, radiocarbon dating from trapped shells, and the style of nearby pottery all point to the same century, the evidence becomes undeniable. This multi-pronged approach does more than just assign a date. It reveals the lifespan of these practices. We can see a community maintaining a specific notch for 500 years, then abandoning it as the shoreline shifted, only to start a new series of carvings at a different location. This transforms a static landscape into a dynamic historical narrative, a story of adaptation written in stone, sand, and time. With this robust chronology firmly in place, the final step becomes possible, peering into the ancient mariner's almanac to read the very tides they saw. This is where the silent stone begins to speak. With a firmly established date for a rock-cut notch, scientists can turn to powerful computer simulations to ask it a direct question. What exact tidal conditions did you record? Modern tidal models are virtual time machines built on the unchanging laws of gravity. They input the precise coastal shape, the underwater topography, and the historical sea level, then set the celestial clock to a specific year. The model calculates the relentless gravitational pull of the moon and sun, simulating the ocean's response hour by hour, day by day, for years on end. The result is a precise reenactment of the sea's rhythm for any given moment in the deep past. The power of this technique is breathtaking. A single notch carved at a 1-meter elevation on a granite cliff in Brittany is no longer just a mark. The model can run through the lunar cycles of, say, 850 BC and pinpoint the exact days when the high tide would have kissed that precise point in the stone. It might reveal that this notch was only reached during the 3 highest spring tides of the year, each one occurring in the stormy autumn months. This transforms a simple groove into a specific instruction, a command to prepare the largest seagoing vessels for their most important annual voyage. For beach ridges, the modeling performs a different kind of magic. It helps scientists sift through the layered history, distinguishing the quiet, rhythmic accumulation of sand from daily high tides from the violent, chaotic deposits of a once-in-a-generation storm. A ridge formed by a hurricane tells a story of disaster and disruption, but a sequence of ridges built by normal tides reveals the dependable, habitual sailing conditions that a community relied upon for centuries. This is where archaeology and oceanography merge into a single discipline. Researchers can now test their theories with digital precision. Did a community abandon a harbor because it silted up? The model can show precisely when the highest tides of the year became too low to float their ships over the new sandbar. Was a particular fishing ground only accessible for a short time each month? The simulation can identify the narrow window of a falling neap tide that would have exposed the crucial reef. Advanced statistical analysis across dozens of these modeled sites often uncovers a startling consistency. Different communities, separated by vast distances, were often recording the same subtle, complex tidal phenomena. They were tracking the rare double high tide where the water level peaks, drops slightly, and then peaks again without a full low tide in between. They noted the powerful tidal bores, the sudden walls of water that rush up certain rivers, which could be either a deadly hazard or a fantastic surfing aid for a canoe, depending on the mariner's skill and knowledge. What emerges is a picture of a science far more nuanced than we might have assumed. These ancient observers were not just noting the obvious high and low water. They were documenting the ocean's eccentricities, its local quirks and special performances. Their priorities, etched into the landscape and now decoded by the model, reveal a deep, intimate partnership with a living, breathing sea. This reconstructed tidal rhythm is the key that finally unlocks the ancient mariner's almanac, allowing us to see the ocean exactly as they did, and to understand the daily decisions that were a matter of life and death. This reconstructed tidal rhythm breathes life back into the silent stones, revealing the daily pulse of vanished coastal towns. We can now watch the ancient harbor come alive, its activities perfectly synchronized with the ocean's clock. As the model predicted tide begins to rise, the first to stir are the fishers. They are not heading out to deep water yet. Instead, they move to intricate stone traps and weirs built across narrow channels, structures whose design only makes sense when you know the tide table. At a specific water level, the current flowing through these gaps becomes a perfect funnel, driving schools of fish directly into waiting nets. The archaeological placement of these structures, correlated with the tidal model, shows they were engineered for a precise moment in the ebb and flow, a short, predictable window of abundance. As the high tide peaks, the economic focus shifts dramatically. This is the moment the entire trading economy has been waiting for. the deep-drafted merchant vessel, laden with amphorae of wine and olive oil, now floats level with the stone quay. The previously exhausting work of loading heavy cargo across a muddy slope vanishes. Dozens of workers can now walk directly from the dock to the ship's deck, transferring tons of goods in a fraction of the time. Efficiency was everything. The moment the loading is complete, the captain watches the water begin to drop against a carved notch on the pier. This is their signal. They cast off, catching the powerful outgoing current that will sweep them cleanly out of the harbor mouth and into the open sea, saving precious days of rowing against the wind. This was not a vague hope, it was a scheduled departure as reliable as a modern train timetable. This intricate dance between land and sea shaped where people lived. A single coastal settlement was not a single-purpose location. It was a multi-stage operational base. Archaeological evidence shows distinct activity zones. The low-lying area right at the water's edge, with its remains of fish processing stations and small boat repairs, was the domain of the low tide, active when the water receded. Higher up the slope, the sturdy longhouses and trading posts were the high tide zones, bustling when the deep water ships could dock. The community itself was laid out like a tidal clock, with people moving through its spaces in rhythm with the sea. Even the tools tell a story of tidal scheduling. In one area of a settlement, archaeologists might find heavy stone anchors and large nets, gear suited for the stable, deep waters of a high-tide fishing expedition. Just a few meters away, in a zone that would have been a rocky shore at low tide, they find evidence of smaller handheld hooks and traps, perfect for foraging in the exposed pools. The distribution of these artifacts is not random. It is a map of the daily tidal cycle, showing how a society used different technologies for different times dictated by the moon. What emerges is a comprehensive picture of a life governed by a rhythm modern society has largely forgotten. The ancient mariner's calendar did not just note a high tide, it scheduled the fishing, the trading, the harvesting of seaweed, and the community's movement across its own landscape. This was a seamless integration of economics and environment, a system where the moon's phase directly dictated the day's labor and the year's prosperity. The survival of such a complex, interlocking system for generations points to one final, crucial question: how was this profound, practical wisdom so effectively preserved and passed down? The very survival of these intricate sailing calendars depended on a living chain of memory, a system of knowledge transmission as sophisticated as the tidal science itself. Without written manuals or digital records, ancient maritime societies developed powerful methods to embed this complex information into the fabric of their culture. The most vital tool was the human voice. Master navigators and seasoned fishers did not simply recite facts, they wove tidal patterns into epic songs and stories. A single verse might track the moon's phases, while a specific character in a myth could represent the powerful current that only ran during a spring tide. These were not just entertaining tales, they were vital mnemonic devices, turning abstract data into unforgettable narratives that could be accurately passed from elder to child for generations. This oral tradition was reinforced by direct physical apprenticeship. A young sailor did not learn from a lecture, but by standing beside a master on a rocky headland, feeling the wind and watching the water. The elder would point to a specific rock, explaining that when the sea just covered its peak, it was time to haul the nets. This hands-on learning created a deep, sensory understanding, linking visual cues with muscle memory and immediate consequences. A mistake in reading the tide meant a lost catch or a grounded boat, providing a powerful and immediate lesson. This knowledge was not theoretical, It was a practiced skill, honed through constant, guided repetition in the real world. The community's entire ceremonial life often served as a backup calendar. Seasonal festivals were frequently scheduled to coincide with the highest tides of the year, the very windows for launching major trading voyages or harvesting specific marine resources. A dance performed during a harvest festival might mimic the motion of waves during a neap tide, while a prayer recited at a solstice ceremony could encode the lunar phase for the next optimal sailing period. Ritual transformed practical necessity into sacred observance, ensuring that every member of the community, not just the sailors, internalized the rhythm of the sea. This created a collective cultural memory that was resilient to the loss of any single individual. The rock-cut notches and engineered channels we find today were the permanent public version of this knowledge. They were the community's external hard drive, a failsafe carved in stone. Anyone who knew the code could walk to the cliff face and check the water level against the groove, verifying the songs and the stories against an unchanging physical standard. In some cultures, this system was made portable. We have evidence of notched sticks or sets of knotted cords that functioned as personal tidal almanacs. A sailor could carry this object, running his fingers along the notches or knots to count down the days to the next spring tide, keeping the ocean's schedule close at hand even when far inland. This entire system was built on redundancy. Tidal knowledge was not stored in one place, but in many, a principle known as distributed memory. The same information was held in the songs, demonstrated in the apprenticeship, celebrated in the ritual, and etched into the landscape. It was further cross-referenced with the stars, the behavior of animals, and the flowering of plants. If a storm destroyed a stone marker, the songs remained. If a generation forgot a verse, the festival date still provided the clue. This multi-layered approach made the knowledge incredibly resilient, allowing it to survive for centuries. The remarkable consistency we see in tidal recording practices across vast stretches of time is a direct testament to the sheer effectiveness of these oral and practical systems. Their success, however, makes their eventual failure all the more profound, revealing the fragile threads that connect us to the deep past. The same forces that perfected these tidal calendars also led to their silent erasure. This deep knowledge did not simply fade away, it was systematically dismantled by a collision of historical pressures. When European colonizers arrived in regions like the Pacific and the Americas, they brought more than new ships, they brought a fundamentally different way of organizing time. Written tidal tables and mechanical clocks offered a portable, standardized system that seemed more modern and reliable than the oral traditions and stone markers of the local populations. This technological shift created a dangerous dependency, outsourcing the vital skill of reading the environment to a printed page or a foreign expert. The local knowledge, once a community's greatest asset, was suddenly dismissed as primitive superstition. Colonial powers soon realized that to control a people, you must control their movement. Deliberate policies were enacted to suppress indigenous navigation, a strategic move to monopolize trade routes and restrict the autonomy of coastal communities. Canoes were destroyed, and the teaching of traditional wayfinding was often banned, severing the living chain of memory that had connected generations of mariners. This cultural assault was sometimes accelerated by catastrophe. Waves of introduced diseases could decimate island populations, and when a community lost its handful of master navigators in a single epidemic, an entire library of tidal science could vanish overnight. The knowledge was so specialized, so deeply held by a few, that its survival was incredibly fragile. Further inland, another quiet disruption was unfolding. As economies shifted from maritime trade to large-scale agriculture or industrial work, families moved away from the coast. A community that no longer launched boats daily, that no longer harvested the tidal flats for food, quickly lost its intimate feel for the ocean's rhythm. The intricate songs and stories, once vital for survival, became mere folklore, their practical meanings forgotten within a generation or two. The true tragedy of this loss is not merely the forgotten schedules, but the extinction of a complete worldview. These calendars represented a philosophy where humanity was a participant in a grand, cosmic dance, not a master of nature. Time was not an abstract grid to be managed, but a living pulse to be harmonized with. The destruction of these systems erased this profound connection, replacing a relationship of partnership with one of dominion. This is why the modern reconstruction of these calendars is so much more than an academic exercise. It is an act of cultural recovery, a way to listen for the echoes of a different intelligence. By understanding how these sophisticated systems were lost, we see the shocking vulnerability of all human knowledge, no matter how deeply embedded in a culture. It reminds us that our own scientific certainty rests on a foundation that must be actively maintained and passed down. Yet, against all odds, the stones and the sand have held their secrets, and science is now providing the key to hear their story once more. Laser light now traces the grooves ancient hands carved in stone. Modern technology is not replacing the careful work of the archaeologist's trowel, but giving it superhuman senses, allowing us to see these coastal clocks with a clarity their creators could never have imagined. High-resolution laser scanners mounted on tripods sweep across a rock face, capturing millions of data points in minutes. This creates a perfect digital twin of the stone, a three-dimensional model so precise we can measure the depth of a tidal notch to the thickness of a coin from an office 1,000 miles away. We can rotate the model, analyze it under simulated lighting, and even digitally peel back layers of lichen, revealing details invisible to the naked eye. This is a permanent, perfect record, immune to the erosion that slowly dulls the original stone. From this intimate view, the scale zooms out to the truly panoramic. Satellites orbiting high above the Earth photograph coastlines in stunning detail. Researchers scan these images, looking for the telltale signatures of human engineering. A perfectly straight line on an otherwise chaotic beach might be a submerged stone wall, a feature that only makes sense as a tidal guide. A series of parallel ridges along a sheltered bay, visible from space, flags a potential archive of ancient shoreline. This bird's eye view acts as a treasure map, guiding field teams to the most promising sites and saving years of aimless searching. It reveals connections, showing how a notch on one headland might visually align with a stone feature on a distant island, creating a cross-harbor navigation system. Once the data is collected, it flows into a digital brain known as a Geographic Information System, or GIS. This is more than a map, it is a powerful analytical engine. A researcher can layer the precise locations of every rock cut notch atop maps of ancient settlements, fishing grounds, and safe anchorages. Suddenly, patterns emerge that were once hidden. They might discover that 90% of the tidal notches along a coastline cluster within sight of a freshwater source, or that they all mark passages avoiding a specific, treacherous underwater reef. The GIS can calculate the lines of sight between markers, proving they were part of an integrated network, a kind of stone internet that shared tidal information across a wide region. The sheer volume of this data, from dozens of sites across centuries, is then sifted by advanced statistical software. This digital sieve separates human intention from natural coincidence. It can demonstrate that the elevations of notches on 3 different islands are not random, but cluster at the same precise tidal levels with a statistical certainty that rules out chance. It proves a shared, systematic observation of the ocean, a common science across a diverse seascape. Perhaps the most powerful tool is digital modeling. Scientists can create a virtual replica of an ancient coastline, complete with its exact topography and sea level. Then they wind back the celestial clock. The software calculates the gravitational pulls, simulating the tides for a full year in the Bronze Age in a matter of seconds. They can test a hypothesis endlessly. Did this community record the highest tide of the year, or the tide that coincided with a seasonal bird migration? The model allows them to run the scenario over and over, comparing the virtual water levels against the real carved stone until the ancient logic reveals itself. All these threads of evidence are woven together in vast digital databases, accessible to archaeologists, oceanographers, and historians simultaneously. This collaborative cloud allows a specialist in Roman pottery to connect their dated fragment directly to an oceanographer's tidal model for that exact year, creating a feedback loop of discovery that accelerates our understanding. We are no longer just looking at silent stones, we are beginning a conversation with them, using the language of modern science to ask the questions that the ancient mariners answered with their lives. These ancient tidal calendars are now speaking directly to one of the most pressing challenges of our time. The same beach ridges that recorded the rhythm of ancient voyages are also preserving a much longer story, a multi-thousand-year chronicle of how shorelines respond to a changing climate. Each ridge is a fossilized watermark, a data point in a massive, natural experiment on coastal resilience. When scientists core into these sedimentary archives, they are not just reading sailing schedules, they are uncovering how entire coastlines expanded, contracted, and transformed as sea levels gently rose and fell over centuries. This provides a powerful, real-world analog, a glimpse into the possible futures for our own transforming coasts. The rock-cut notches offer a different kind of truth. A notch carved to mark a high tide 4,000 years ago now sits well above the modern waterline. Its precise elevation is a fixed point, an undeniable benchmark of where the sea once was. By mapping dozens of these notches along a coastline, researchers can plot a detailed curve of historical sea level, refining our models and telling us not just how fast the water is rising now, but how it has behaved over millennia. This long-term perspective is crucial, separating short-term fluctuations from the relentless, grinding trend of change. But perhaps the most profound lesson is not in the stone itself, but in the human response it records. We see communities that did not simply abandon their harbors at the first sign of change. Instead, they adapted. As a harbor slowly silted up, lowering the effective water level at high tide, they did not give up on the sea. They carved new notches at a lower elevation, or they shifted their entire operation to a different part of the coast, building new stone markers and engineering new channels. Their sailing calendars were not static documents, they were living documents constantly updated through direct observation. This demonstrates a remarkable capacity for flexible, practical adaptation. The sophisticated understanding these cultures possessed was their greatest asset for resilience. They knew their local stretch of coast with an intimacy we have largely lost. They could anticipate how a slight rise in sea level would alter a specific current or expose a new fishing ground. This granular, place-based knowledge allowed them to adjust their practices incrementally, avoiding catastrophic collapse. What is uniquely valuable about these systems is that they were not theoretical. They were survival strategies forged in the crucible of daily life, tested and refined across countless human generations. They represent a form of wisdom earned through long-term partnership with a dynamic environment. This historical perspective offers a crucial reframing for our own situation. Coastal adaptation is not a new, insurmountable problem invented in the 21st century. It is a challenge that maritime societies have successfully navigated for thousands of years. Their legacy reminds us that the key to resilience may not lie solely in building higher seawalls, but in rediscovering that deep, localized understanding of the coastal environment. Their story suggests that the most durable solutions are those woven into the cultural fabric, passed down through stories, rituals, and hands-on practice. The silent stones and layered beaches thus become more than historical curiosities. They transform into guides, offering timeless lessons in how to live with, and not just fight against, the power of the sea. The silent stones of ancient harbors are now finding their voice in modern classrooms, transforming complex science into tangible discovery. Students can hold a piece of limestone etched with a simulated tidal notch, feeling the groove that once guided a ship's launch, and suddenly the abstract concept of lunar gravity becomes something they can touch and measure. This is not just learning about history, it is doing history using the same methods of observation and deduction that archaeologists employ in the field. A simple classroom exercise might involve using a large tub, a bag of sand, and a pitcher of water to model how beach ridges form with each simulated tide. As students slowly pour the water, creating wave after wave, they watch the sand build into distinct lines, each one a record of a specific water level. They learn firsthand how a coastal landscape archives its own history, grain by grain. This hands-on investigation naturally weaves together disciplines that are often kept separate. A single tidal notch becomes a lesson in physics, revealing the gravitational dance of the Earth and Moon. It becomes a data point for a math class where students graph notch elevations to find statistical patterns. It sparks a creative writing assignment, imagining the journey of the sailor who relied on that mark. This interdisciplinary approach shows students that the world's most interesting problems do not come in labeled boxes. They demand a toolkit of skills from across the spectrum of knowledge. By trying to reconstruct a small piece of a vanished sailing calendar, a student sees how a geologist's map, a historian's text, and an oceanographer's model are all pieces of the same puzzle. The global story of these calendars offers a powerful lesson in both unity and diversity. A class can compare the subtle, harbor-specific notches of the Mediterranean with the grand, landscape-altering structures of the Atlantic coast. They discover that while the gravitational principles are universal, every culture developed a unique response, a technology perfectly tailored to its local sea and its cultural needs. This comparative study fosters a deep appreciation for indigenous knowledge systems, revealing the sophisticated engineering and observational genius often dismissed as primitive. Students begin to understand that a Micronesian navigator's star path was as complex a calculation as any modern algorithm. This detective work is also a masterclass in critical thinking. Students are presented with a coastline, a set of mysterious stone markings, and scattered archaeological finds. Their task is not to memorize answers, but to ask the right questions. Why is this notch at this exact height? Why do these carvings cluster near a freshwater spring? The process teaches them to weigh evidence, to consider multiple hypotheses, and to understand that historical interpretation is a process of building the most likely story from fragmentary clues. It turns them from passive recipients of information into active investigators. Most importantly, this knowledge bridges the gap between the ancient world and their own. The same beach ridges that record Bronze Age tides are now central to understanding modern sea level rise. A student measuring the elevation of an ancient notch is directly engaging with the data of environmental change. They see that the challenge of adapting to a dynamic coastline is not new, and they can draw inspiration from the long-term strategies of past societies. This connection makes history feel urgently relevant, not just a record of what happened, but a guidebook for what might come next. The recovery of this lost maritime science does more than fill textbooks. It equips a new generation with a more profound, interconnected way of seeing their world, one tide at a time. This ancient wisdom is now charting a course for the modern world. Surprisingly, the reconstruction of these forgotten sailing calendars is providing practical solutions for contemporary maritime challenges, especially in regions where traditional knowledge endures or where modern technology proves fragile. Across several Pacific Island nations, the recovery of traditional tidal law is no longer just a cultural project. It is a vital layer of redundancy. When a fishing boat's GPS fails or a storm disrupts satellite signals, a navigator's understanding of how the tide flows between two atolls becomes a lifeline, a backup system written not in code, but in the memory of the sea itself. This knowledge provides a crucial safety net in areas where electronic coverage is sparse or unreliable. On a larger scale, the long-term tidal patterns decoded from ancient beach ridges and notches are giving port engineers and coastal planners an invaluable historical perspective. By understanding the true extremes of the tide over centuries, not just decades, they can design harbors, seawalls, and flood defenses with a much deeper appreciation for the ocean's full range of power. This historical data helps answer critical questions about where to build and how high to construct, making modern infrastructure more resilient against the uncertainties of a changing climate. The commercial fishing industry is also learning from these ancient almanacs. Traditional tidal calendars did not just note high and low water, they identified the precise conditions that triggered the movement of specific fish species. By relearning how ancient fishers linked certain tidal phases with abundance, modern operations can time their expeditions with far greater precision. This means less time burning fuel in a fruitless search and more time with nets in the water at the exact moment the ocean is most generous, boosting efficiency while reducing environmental impact. Even major shipping lines are taking note. The principle of using tidal currents as a natural propulsion system, a practice perfected by ancient voyagers, is inspiring new routing software for coastal freighters. By scheduling a vessel's passage to catch a favorable tidal stream, just as a Polynesian canoe would have, a massive container ship can significantly cut its fuel consumption and emissions, turning the ocean's own energy into a source of sustainable transit. In many developing coastal regions, this recovered knowledge is perhaps most transformative. It offers a low-cost, accessible form of navigation and resource management that does not require expensive electronics or constant maintenance. A community can teach its children to read the tidal notches on a local headland, creating a self-sustaining, perpetual aid to navigation that empowers local fishers and traders. The overarching lesson from these systems is a philosophy of partnership. Ancient mariners did not try to conquer the sea, they learned to listen to its rhythms and work within its patterns. This principle of observing natural cycles and adapting to them offers a powerful blueprint for sustainable maritime development today. It encourages modern sailors, port managers, and fishermen to develop that same deep, intimate familiarity with their local waters, to know the personality of a particular current or the mood of a specific tide. The fact that these ancient systems are finding new life in the 21st century is the ultimate testament to their sophistication. They were not primitive guesses, but a refined science of place, and their rediscovery is proving that the most advanced solutions are sometimes those that have been waiting in the stone and the sand all along. Unlocking the secrets of a rock-cut notch is more than a scientific process. it is a deeply human encounter. This research inevitably crosses into the living heritage of communities whose ancestors carved these marks. A fundamental question arises: who truly owns this knowledge? When a researcher deciphers a tidal pattern from a stone on a remote Pacific island, are they uncovering a universal fact, or are they interpreting the intellectual property of a specific culture, preserved through generations of oral tradition? The answer shapes every step that follows. Scientific openness, the drive to publish all findings, can sometimes clash with cultural confidentiality. For some indigenous communities, certain types of knowledge are not meant for public consumption. They are sacred, restricted to specific lineages or roles within the society. Publishing the precise timing of a ceremonial fishing ground, decoded from a series of notches, could be seen as a profound violation, a theft of spiritual patrimony. This creates a necessary tension, pushing researchers away from a model of extraction and toward one of collaboration. The goal shifts from taking knowledge to building a partnership where the community has a decisive voice in how, or even if, information is shared. This is especially critical when the recovered knowledge has tangible value. A reconstructed sailing calendar could reveal optimal, fuel-saving shipping routes, a direct commercial application. A decoded understanding of traditional fish spawning grounds tied to tidal phases could inform modern fisheries management. In these cases, ethical research demands that the communities who preserved this wisdom for centuries are not merely informants, but equitable partners in any benefits that result. The very act of investigation can be intrusive. A team arriving with scanning equipment and coring drills might unintentionally damage a site that local fishers still use, consulting an ancient notch to judge the day's catch. Researchers must tread carefully, ensuring their quest for the past does not disrupt the living present. Furthermore, the stories science uncovers can be disruptive in other ways. A reconstructed tidal calendar might prove that a community has used a fishing ground for 1,000 years longer than official records state, challenging government policies or corporate claims. Presenting such findings requires immense care, as it can become a tool for empowerment or a spark for conflict. The most responsible path forward is one of humility and shared authority. It involves sitting with community elders not just to get answers, but to listen. It means recognizing that the full meaning of a tidal feature is not in its elevation alone, but in the songs, stories, and rituals that give it context, a context that may never be fully revealed to an outsider. This ethical dimension transforms the entire endeavor. It is no longer about what we can learn from the stones, but how we learn and who we learn with, ensuring that the voices of the past are honored by the practices of the present. The future of this research lies beneath the waves. As sea levels have risen since the last ice age, vast stretches of ancient coastline now lie submerged, preserving a frozen archive of tidal features from eras when the shore was miles out to sea. Underwater archaeology, using advanced sonar and submersibles, is poised to discover these drowned notches and ridges. These submerged sites could extend our chronological reach by thousands of years, capturing the sailing calendars of the very first coastal migrations, when humans first learned to harness the moon's rhythm for exploration. Our ability to date these discoveries is also undergoing a quiet revolution. New refinements in luminescence dating can now pinpoint when a single sand grain was buried with unprecedented accuracy, potentially distinguishing a beach ridge formed in 850 BC from one created just a few decades later. Similarly, surface exposure dating techniques are becoming so precise they could reveal the exact century a tidal notch was first carved into a granite cliff, allowing us to track the evolution of a maritime community's knowledge across generations. To make sense of the resulting flood of data, researchers are turning to artificial intelligence. and our eye can be trained to scan thousands of coastal images, both from satellites and from laser scans of rock faces, searching for subtle patterns in the distribution of notches that a human eye might miss. It could identify a systematic recording of the 18.6-year lunar cycle across a dozen different sites, proving a shared, sophisticated astronomy that connected distant harbors. This digital detective can sift through noise to find the hidden signal of a universal maritime science. The map of this research is also expanding geographically. While studies in the Mediterranean and Europe are advanced, the coastlines of Africa, South Asia, and South America remain largely unexplored from this perspective. Investigating these regions will provide a truly global understanding of how different cultures, isolated from one another, independently arrived at their own methods for reading the ocean's clock. Each new site adds a unique verse to humanity's collective epic of seafaring. We are even learning to read the biological footprints trapped in the sediment. Genetic analysis of ancient marine DNA preserved in beach ridge cores can reconstruct the historical ecosystem. Scientists can determine what species of fish were abundant, what shellfish thrived in the tidal pools, and how this marine life shifted with the tides. This reveals not just when ancient people could sail, but why they sailed, linking tidal phases directly to the pursuit of specific, plentiful resources. This entire endeavor remains grounded through partnership with living tradition. Contemporary Polynesian and Micronesian navigators who are actively reviving their ancestral arts provide a living laboratory. By observing how they interpret subtle tidal cues during actual voyages, archaeologists gain an invaluable frame of reference for understanding the fragmentary evidence left behind. It turns abstract theory into practiced reality. These diverse streams of evidence will flow into ever more powerful computer models. Future tidal simulations will incorporate detailed historical climate data, accounting for long-vanished ocean currents and atmospheric pressures. This will allow us to recreate the exact sea conditions a Roman captain faced while checking a stone marker, with a level of detail that borders on time travel. Perhaps the most transformative shift will come from the hands of the public. Citizen science initiatives are empowering coastal communities worldwide to become documentarians of their own shores. Locals who know every cove and headland can use smartphone apps to photograph and map potential tidal features, dramatically expanding the database for professional researchers. This collaborative model ensures that the search for these ancient calendars becomes a shared human venture, reconnecting people with the maritime wisdom hidden in their own backyards. The stones have held their secrets for millennia, and now, with every new tool and partnership, we are learning to listen just a little more closely. A tidal notch was never just a mark on a rock, it was a conversation with the gods. The same forces that dictated the launch of a trading vessel also governed the rhythm of creation and destruction in the minds of the people who carved them. For many ancient cultures, the relentless pulse of the tides became the physical manifestation of a cosmic balance, a visible, tangible cycle of life, death, and rebirth played out on the shoreline twice each day. The sea was not a passive resource to be managed, but a living, breathing entity with a will and a voice. Extreme tidal events, those dramatic spring tides or sudden, violent bores, were rarely seen as mere natural phenomena. They were the actions of deities, the breath of sea monsters, or the mood of an ancestral spirit. A myth from the Pacific might tell of a god pulling the ocean back to reveal hidden lands as a gift, while a story from the North Atlantic could describe a giant sleeping beneath the waves whose stirrings created the treacherous currents. These were not just fanciful tales, they were vital explanatory frameworks. They provided a reason for the ocean's behavior and, more importantly, prescribed the correct human response. Rituals performed at a specific tidal phase were not superstition. They were a form of diplomacy with a powerful and unpredictable neighbor. The physical landscape itself was sanctified through this relationship. The act of carving a tidal notch into a cliff was not solely an engineering task. It could be a ceremonial act, a way of inscribing a sacred covenant into the earth. By marking the high tide line of a king tide, a community was not just noting a navigational aid, they were acknowledging the maximum reach of a divine power. A beach ridge reinforced with stone might serve as a practical barrier, but it could also be seen as a boundary between the mundane world of the village and the sacred, dynamic realm of the sea. These locations often became sites for offerings, initiations, or seasonal festivals timed to the very tidal phases they recorded. The knowledge required to interpret these signs was similarly sacred. A master navigator was more than a skilled sailor. He was often a priest or a shaman, a person who held a privileged relationship with the spirits of the ocean. His ability to predict the tides was proof of this connection, a form of wisdom granted by the deities who controlled the waves. This knowledge was not merely taught, it was often ceremonially transferred, wrapped in layers of ritual and secrecy to protect its power. This deep integration of the practical and the spiritual made the entire system incredibly resilient. A tidal calendar was not a set of cold, hard facts to be memorized. It was a living story in which every member of the community played a part. The fisherman who checked the notch, the elder who sang the song of the moon, and the child who left a shell at the water's edge during a festival were all participating in the same cosmic dialogue. The stone marker was not just a tool, it was an altar. The sailing schedule was not just a timetable, it was a liturgy. To separate the technical function of these calendars from their mythological heart is to misunderstand them completely. They were a single, unified expression of a culture's identity, a profound recognition that humanity's survival was woven into the great turning gears of the universe. Granite coastlines demanded marks that would last for ages. In regions like Brittany or Cornwall, where the bedrock was hard and enduring, communities invested immense labor in carving precise notches directly into the stone. These permanent gauges became community property, a shared reference point for generations. Yet travel to a forested coastline where wood was abundant and stone was soft, and the evidence shifts entirely. Here, ancient mariners would have driven carefully notched wooden posts into the tidal flats. While the wood itself has long since rotted away, archaeology can sometimes find the dark, organic stains in the soil, the ghostly imprint of the post holes that held these perishable calendars. In the tropical Pacific, the material of choice was often coral. Islanders constructed intricate platforms and sighting walls from carefully fitted coral blocks, creating permanent features that aligned with the highest spring tides. The material itself tells a story of adaptation, a direct reflection of the resources a culture had on hand to solve a universal problem. The priorities encoded in these features were equally local. In the massive tidal ranges of the Atlantic, a notch might mark a dramatic 15-foot difference, a life or death measurement for crossing an exposed river bar. Meanwhile, in the subtle waters of the Mediterranean, a carefully placed stone marker might record a difference of just a few inches, a precision necessary for determining if a heavily laden grain ship would float freely or scrape the harbor bottom. One culture's vital navigational hazard was another's irrelevance. This specialization extended into the social fabric of knowledge itself. In some Polynesian societies, the deep science of tides, stars, and currents was a closely guarded secret, mastered by a specialized guild of navigators who held immense status and power. Their knowledge was a form of elite intellectual property, passed from father to son in rigorous apprenticeships. Contrast this with the communal fishing villages of Northern Europe, where the meaning of the tidal notches was likely common knowledge, understood by every adult and child who participated in the daily harvest from the sea. In one culture, knowledge was concentrated for power. In another, it was distributed for collective survival. The calendars themselves could be standalone or integrated. Some societies, like the Phoenicians, appear to have maintained sophisticated, specialized maritime calendars focused solely on the optimal windows for trade and voyage. For them, the tidal cycle was a business schedule. Elsewhere, this knowledge was woven seamlessly into a comprehensive seasonal round. The highest tide of the year might coincide with a harvest festival, a religious ceremony, and the start of the whaling season, blending the practical, the spiritual, and the economic into a single, unified heartbeat for the entire culture. This incredible diversity forces modern researchers to be just as adaptable as the ancient mariners they study. The techniques used to interpret a coral platform in Micronesia are different from those needed to understand a series of post holes in a Scottish loch. Scientists must become cultural translators, learning to read the local language of the landscape. They must ask not just what a feature is, but why it was important to that specific group of people, with their unique resources, dangers, and social structure. When we step back and view these systems from a global perspective, a profound pattern emerges. The universal principle is the human drive to observe, quantify, and predict the rhythms of nature for survival. The specific expression of that principle, however, is endlessly variable, a beautiful testament to cultural ingenuity. This global tapestry of tidal timekeeping shows us that there is no single path to maritime mastery, only a shared, deep-seated need to listen to the ocean's clock. This fascinating research is now stepping out of scientific journals and into the public square, inviting everyone to become a coastal detective. The challenge lies in translating complex, interdisciplinary findings into stories that captivate and educate. Museums are rising to this task with stunning effectiveness. Imagine walking through an exhibition where you can run your fingers over a full-scale replica of a rock-cut notch, feeling the precise groove that once guided a ship. Beside it, an interactive screen lets you manipulate the phases of the moon, watching a digital ocean rise and fall to match the carved stone. Visitors can handle reproductions of knotted cord almanacs and notched navigation sticks, transforming abstract celestial mechanics into tangible, personal experiences. These exhibits do more than display facts. They create a visceral connection to the ancient mariner's world. Documentary filmmakers are capturing the thrilling uncertainty of the scientific process itself. A camera crew following archaeologists as they scan a newly discovered headland shares the genuine excitement of finding a cluster of unexplained notches. The audience witnesses the collaborative debate between the geomorphologist, the oceanographer, and the local historian as they piece together a theory. This behind-the-scenes access reveals science not as a collection of settled facts, but as a dynamic human endeavor full of questions and surprises. The most powerful outreach often happens right on the shoreline. Community archaeology projects invite local residents to help map and document tidal features in their own backyards. A lifelong fisherman might share his knowledge of a current, providing a crucial clue that helps researchers understand why a particular notch was carved where it was. This collaboration transforms community members from passive observers into active partners in discovery, fostering a deep, personal investment in preserving their maritime heritage. Social media platforms burst with this ongoing detective work. Researchers post short videos from the field, showing the laser scanner at work on a cliff face or a core sample being extracted from a beach ridge. Followers can participate in live discussions, asking questions directly to the scientists as they analyze new data. This immediate, interactive dialogue demystifies the research process and builds a global community of enthusiasts. Public lectures and festival presentations bridge the gap between past and present. A talk might begin with a reconstructed Bronze Age sailing calendar and then pivot to show how that same long-term tidal data is informing modern coastal defense plans against sea level rise. This direct line from ancient wisdom to contemporary problem-solving demonstrates the profound and practical value of understanding our history. In classrooms, this subject becomes a perfect interdisciplinary tool. Students might use satellite images to identify potential tidal features on their local coast, then calculate tidal ranges using simple math. They debate the ethical questions of cultural knowledge, and they design their own tidal calendars based on local conditions. This approach inspires a new generation to see the interconnectedness of history, science, and the environment. Artists are also joining the conversation, creating installations where projected tidal data washes over sculptures of ancient boats or composing soundscapes from the recorded rhythms of waves and tidal currents. These works communicate the emotional and spiritual dimension of this knowledge, reaching people on an intuitive level that pure data cannot. All these efforts share a common goal: to ensure that the recovery of this lost science enriches society as a whole. By inviting the public to share in the wonder of discovery, we build a broad coalition of support for protecting these fragile coastal sites. This shared stewardship guarantees that the silent stones will continue to speak for generations to come. Our journey through the world of tidal timekeeping reveals the profound partnership ancient mariners forged with the sea. They transformed the ocean's rhythmic pulse into a sophisticated science, etching their understanding into the very coastline. From the precise rock-cut notches marking a ship's launch window to the layered beach ridges archiving centuries of patterns, these features are a testament to humanity's enduring quest to harmonize with natural cycles. The reconstruction of these vanished sailing calendars uncovers a remarkable body of environmental knowledge, developed through patient observation across countless generations. This challenges our modern assumptions about technological sophistication, proving that deep wisdom can flourish without digital screens or complex machinery. It was a science built on memory, mentorship, and a meticulous reading of the world. This entire investigation stands as a powerful example of how interdisciplinary research can resurrect lost knowledge systems. By bridging archaeology with oceanography, history with indigenous tradition, we piece together a complete picture of how our ancestors navigated their world. Each discipline provides a unique voice in the chorus, and only together can they fully decipher the messages left in stone and sand. The relevance of these ancient systems extends far beyond historical curiosity. They offer us vital perspectives on sustainable coastal living and intelligent adaptation to environmental change. In an era of rising seas, these calendars remind us that humans have successfully negotiated changing maritime environments for millennia. Their strategies were not about dominating the coast, but about moving with it, adapting their marks and their practices as the shoreline itself evolved. This recovered knowledge represents more than an academic achievement. It is the preservation of an alternative way of understanding time and our place in the natural world. It shows us a path toward rekindling a relationship with our environment based on observation and respect rather than control. I encourage you to visit coastal areas with new eyes. Look closely at the rock formations and the subtle lines of the shore. You might just spot the faint evidence of how earlier societies read the tides, and perhaps begin to consider how we can develop similarly sophisticated, lasting relationships with our own surroundings. If this exploration into the ocean's ancient clocks has captivated your imagination as it has mine, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. For more journeys into the mysteries of our past, be sure to subscribe.